There are things we carry that we don't put into words. Not because they're too terrible. Not because we're ashamed. But because speaking them out loud makes them real in a way silence never does. This is one of those things for me. I'm going to tell you about the day I realized I'd been living someone else's life, and how the person I hurt most wasn't a stranger, or an enemy, or even someone who deserved it. It was me. It started with a text message I wasn't supposed to see. I was 32 years old, standing in my beautiful kitchen with the marble countertops I'd insisted on, in the house that took us 8 years to save for, holding my husband's phone because he'd asked me to check a notification while he was in the shower. The text was from his brother. It said, "Hey man, I know you're stressed. But remember, you only get one life. Don't spend it being someone you're not." I stared at those words, read them twice, 3 times, and I felt something crack open in my chest. But here's the thing, I didn't think the message was about me. I thought it was about him. About whatever crisis he must be going through. About the pressure he was under at work, or the weight of the mortgage, or the arguments we'd been having about money. I put the phone down gently, went back to chopping vegetables for a dinner I didn't feel like making. And I told myself everything was fine. But that text planted something. A seed. A question. And over the next few weeks, it grew into something I couldn't ignore. Here's what I need you to understand. I was successful. By every measure that matters to the world, I was winning. I had a master's degree in marketing, a job at a firm where people respected my opinion, a salary that let me buy the kind of wine I used to only taste at other people's parties. I had a husband who loved me, a house in a good neighborhood, a car that didn't make weird noises. I was supposed to be happy, and I told everyone I was. I posted photos of our renovated bathroom. I complained about work in that performative way that really means you're humble bragging about how busy and important you are. I made jokes about marriage. I said things like, adulting is hard, when what I really meant was, I feel like I'm suffocating and I don't know why. The truth I wouldn't admit, even to myself, was this. I had built my entire adult life around what I thought I was supposed to want, not what I actually wanted. When I was 22, fresh out of college, my mom sat me down at her kitchen table and said, "Now comes the real work. Building a life. Building security." She said it with this weight in her voice, like she was handing me a sacred responsibility. My mom had worked 3 jobs to raise me and my sister after my dad left. She ate cereal for dinner so we could have real meals. She wore the same winter coat for 15 years. I watched her sacrifice everything. I watched her age faster than she should have. I watched her cry in the bathroom when she thought we were asleep, the kind of crying that comes from exhaustion, so deep it lives in your bones. So when she talked about security, about building something solid, I listened. I internalized it. I made it my religion. I chose marketing because it was practical. Even though I'd spent my college years writing short stories in coffee shops at 2 in the morning, even though my creative writing professor had pulled me aside once and said I had something real. She'd looked at me with these intense eyes and said, "You have a voice. Don't lose it trying to fit into someone else's idea of success." I thanked her. I told her I wouldn't. And then I did exactly that. I chose the corporate job because it had benefits and a retirement plan, even though the startup that wanted to hire me offered adventure and purpose and work that felt alive. I remember sitting in the interview at the marketing firm, in their sterile conference room with motivational posters about synergy and innovation, and feeling absolutely nothing. No excitement, no curiosity, just this cold calculation about salary and stability. The startup interview had been different. It was in someone's converted loft. They had a dog that wandered through the meeting. The founder talked about changing how people connect with literature, about building something that mattered. I left that interview feeling electric. And then I turned them down. I chose safety every single time. And I told myself that's what smart people do. I met David when I was 26. He was kind, stable. He had a 5-year plan that he'd actually written down in a leather journal. He wanted the same things I convinced myself I wanted. A house, kids eventually, a predictable life that wouldn't betray us the way life had betrayed my mother. Our first date was nice. That's the word I used when my friends asked. Nice. Not magical. Not extraordinary. Just nice. He held the door open. He asked about my job. He split the check when I insisted. He texted me the next day to say he had a good time. And that was enough. I made it enough. When he proposed, I said yes without hesitation, not because my heart was bursting, but because it made sense. Because he was a good man. Because this was what you did. We were at a restaurant I'd mentioned liking once, and he'd remembered. He'd planned it all out. The ring was beautiful. Everyone around us clapped. And I felt like I was watching it happen to someone else. But I smiled. I cried the right kind of tears. I called my mom and she was so happy, so relieved. She said, Finally, you're building something that will last. And I heard the subtext. Finally, you're making choices I don't have to worry about. For 6 years, I performed happiness so well that I almost believed it myself. But that text message, those words about not spending your life being someone you're not, they opened a door I'd been keeping locked. And once it was open, I couldn't close it again. I started noticing things. Small things at first. Like how I'd stopped reading. I used to read 3 books a week, losing myself in other worlds, other possibilities. I'd stay up until 3 in the morning finishing a novel, then go to work exhausted but satisfied, carrying the story with me like a secret. But somewhere along the way, I'd replace that with scrolling through home improvement accounts on Instagram, convincing myself that the right throw pillows would make me feel something. I had a bookshelf in our living room. David had built it for me as an anniversary gift. It was beautiful, custom-made, with perfect lighting. And it was full of books I'd never read. Books I'd bought because they looked good, because they were the kind of books that successful, intelligent people were supposed to have. I'd arrange them by color for a photo I posted online that got 200 likes. Or how I never wrote anymore. Not even in a journal. I used to carry a notebook everywhere, filling it with observations, overheard conversations, ideas for stories. My purse was always heavy with the weight of possibility. But I'd stopped. I'd tell myself I was too busy, too tired, but the real reason was darker than that. Writing made me feel things. It connected me to a version of myself I'd buried, and I couldn't afford to meet her. Not when I'd worked so hard to become someone else. There was a box in our garage. Just a regular cardboard box, not even labeled. Inside were all my old notebooks from college. Dozens of them. 10 years of thoughts and stories and dreams. I'd put them out there when we moved into the house. Told David I was going to organize them. That was 4 years ago. The box hadn't moved. Or how when David and I had sex, which was maybe once every 2 weeks if we were being generous, I'd lie there afterwards staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than if I'd been by myself. Not because he wasn't trying. He was always gentle, always considerate, always asking if I was okay, but because I was giving him a performance, not a person. I'd make the right sounds, move the right ways, and afterwards I'd curl up next to him and feel like I was miles away. There was this one night, maybe 2 months before the text message, when he finished and rolled over and said, "I love you." And I said it back automatically, the way you say "bless you" when someone sneezes. And then I lay there in the dark, listening to him fall asleep, and I couldn't remember the last time I'd meant it. Not because I didn't care about him, but because I didn't know who the I was anymore that was supposed to be doing the loving, that I was a stranger in my own life. And the worst part, I'd done it to myself. Every choice, every compromise, every time I'd picked safety over truth, I'd been building a prison so beautiful that no one could see the bars, including me. I'd decorated the prison. I'd hung art on the walls and planted flowers in the yard and invited people over for dinner parties where we'd drink wine and complain about property taxes and pretend this was what fulfillment looked like. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I was in a meeting, one of those endless strategy sessions where we talked about consumer engagement and brand loyalty and all these abstract concepts that felt so disconnected from actual human life. My boss was presenting a campaign for a luxury car company. The tagline was something like, "Live the life you deserve." And I felt it. This wave of something I can only describe as grief. Because I wasn't living the life I deserved. I was living the life I'd been too afraid not to live. The presentation continued. Charts and graphs about market demographics. Discussion about which social media platforms to target. My colleagues were nodding, taking notes, offering suggestions. And I sat there feeling like I was underwater, watching their mouths move but barely hearing the words. I excused myself. Told them I wasn't feeling well, which wasn't a lie. I felt sick in a way that had nothing to do with my body. I drove home in the middle of the day, which I never did, and I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, just staring at my house. This house we'd chosen together. This house with the good school, district, even though we didn't have kids yet. This house that was supposed to represent everything we'd accomplished. The American dream in brick and mortar. And all I could think was, I don't want to go inside. I sat there watching a neighbor walk their dog, watched them stop to chat with another neighbor, watched them laugh about something, and I felt this crushing awareness that everyone around me seemed to know how to be a person, and I'd forgotten. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I told David the truth. Not all of it at once. I didn't have the words yet for all of it. But I started. We were sitting on the couch, some show playing that neither of us was really watching, and I said, I think I'm not okay. I think I haven't been okay for a long time, and I've been pretending. My voice shook when I said it. I expected him to be angry, or defensive, or dismissive. I expected him to tell me I was being dramatic, or hormonal, or ungrateful. Instead, he was quiet for a long time. He picked up the remote and turned off the TV. The silence felt huge. And then he said, I know. Those 2 words nearly destroyed me. He knew. He'd known. And he'd watched me disappear anyway, maybe because he didn't know how to reach me, or maybe because he was disappearing too. We stayed up until 3 a.m, saying things we should have said years ago. He told me. He'd felt my absence. Not physical. I was always there, but emotional. He said it was like living with a ghost of the person he'd fallen in love with. And the crushing thing was he was right. I had been a ghost. I'd been haunting my own life. He told me about the nights he'd lie awake next to me, wanting to ask if I was happy but being too afraid of the answer. He told me he'd noticed the books I bought but never read. He'd seen the notebooks in the garage. He said once, early in our marriage, he'd opened one of them, just curious, and he'd read a story I'd written about a woman who wakes up one day and realizes she's been sleepwalking through her life. It was beautiful, he said, and terrifying, because I wondered if you were writing about yourself even then. But here's the part that broke me, the part one swore I'd never tell anyone because it makes me sound selfish and ungrateful and all the things we're not supposed to be. When he asked me what I wanted, what would make me happy, I realized I didn't know. I'd spent so many years not asking myself that question that I'd lost the ability to answer it. I sat there on our couch, this expensive couch we'd spent weeks choosing, and I couldn't tell my husband what would make me happy. I could tell him what was supposed to make me happy. I could recite the list: meaningful work, good health, financial security, loving relationships. But what actually made me feel alive? What made me feel like myself? I had no idea. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. Harder than my parents' divorce. Harder than the year my mom got sick, and I had to manage her care while working full-time. Because this time, I couldn't blame anyone else. I couldn't point to an external crisis and say that's why I'm struggling. This was internal. This was me, facing the fact that I'd abandoned myself, and now I had to figure out how to come back. David and I started going to therapy, both together and separately. Our couple's therapist was this woman in her 60s who had kind eyes and didn't let us get away with anything. In our second session, she said something that stopped me cold. You can't negotiate your way back to intimacy. You have to feel your way back. I'd been trying to fix our marriage like it was a work project. Making lists, setting goals, scheduling date nights like they were client meetings. And she was telling me that wasn't how this worked. In one of my solo sessions, my therapist asked me, when was the last time you did something? Just because it made you happy? Not because it was productive, or impressive, or good for your career. Just because it brought you joy. I couldn't answer. I sat there, this successful adult woman with a master's degree and a mortgage, and I couldn't name a single thing I did purely for joy. She waited, didn't rush me, didn't offer suggestions, just waited. Finally, I said, I don't think I know what that feels like anymore. And she said, then that's what we're going to work on. She gave me homework. She said, this week, I want you to do one thing that 22-year-old you would have loved before you started building this other life. What would she have done? On a random Wednesday, I thought about it all week. And the interesting thing was, the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I'd lost. 22-year-old me would have gone to open mic nights. She would have wandered through art galleries. She would have taken the long way home just to see a sunset. She would have sat in parks with a notebook and made up stories about strangers. She would have done 100 things I couldn't imagine doing now. On that Wednesday, I left work early. I didn't lie about being sick or make up an excuse. I just said I needed to leave, and I did. My boss looked confused. I'd never done anything like that before, but she nodded. I went to a bookstore, one of those independent ones that smells like paper and possibility. The kind of place where the staff actually reads and can recommend things based on what you're feeling, not just what's on the bestseller list. I spent an hour wandering the aisles, pulling books off shelves, reading first pages, putting them back. Finally, I chose 3 novels. Not because they were impressive, not because they were the kind of books I should read, but because when I read the first few pages, something in my chest loosened. Then I went to a coffee shop, the kind with mismatched furniture and baristas with creative piercings, and I ordered something I actually wanted instead of my usual efficient medium black coffee. I got some ridiculous drink with foam and cinnamon, and I sat in a corner and I read for 3 hours straight. No phone, no laptop, just me and a story. And I cried, right there in the coffee shop, tears running down my face, because it felt so good to do something that was mine. Something that fed a part of me I'd been starving for a decade. A barista came over at one point and asked if I was okay. And I laughed, which probably made me look unhinged, and I said, yes, I think maybe I am. That was 6 months ago. I'm not going to lie to you and say everything's perfect now. I'm not going to wrap this up with a neat bow and tell you I quit my job, found my passion, and now I'm living my best life while drinking green smoothies at sunrise. Real life doesn't work like that. What I will tell you is this: I did leave my job. Not impulsively, not dramatically, but after 3 months of careful thought and planning and conversations with David about what it would mean for us financially. I took a position at a small nonprofit that pays 40% less than what I was making, but where I get to work with writers and artists and people who are building something they believe in. The day I gave my notice, my boss looked genuinely shocked. She said, "But you're on track for director. You're throwing away years of building your career." And maybe I am. Maybe in 5 years I'll regret it. But I couldn't stay. Not when every day felt like I was betraying something essential. Some days I panic about money. We had to adjust our budget. No more spontaneous dinners out. No more expensive wine. We're talking about selling the house, moving into something smaller, something that doesn't require so much of our energy and income just to maintain. And some days I wonder if I made a mistake, if I gave up too much, if the practical version of me was actually the smart one. But I'm writing again. Every morning before work, I sit at my kitchen table, the one with the marble countertops that matter less to me now, and I write for an hour. Most of it's garbage. Some of it's not. But that's not really the point. The point is I'm showing up for myself in a way I haven't in years. I filled one notebook, then another. They're not the kind of polished stories I used to write in college. They're messier, more honest. They're about women who wake up in lives they don't recognize. About marriages that look perfect from the outside. About the small ways we betray ourselves. I showed one to David. I was terrified, but he read it slowly, carefully, and when he finished he said, "This is you. The real you." I missed her. My marriage with David is different now. We're rebuilding it, not trying to get back to what it was, but creating something new. Something more honest. He's doing his own work, too. Turns out that text from his brother was about him. He'd been feeling trapped in his own life, his own version of the same prison. He was working a job he'd taken because it was stable, staying in a marriage that felt more like a business arrangement, following a script he'd never questioned. We'd been 2 people drowning in the same ocean, both too proud or too scared to ask for help. Now we're learning how to swim. Some days are good. We laugh over dinner. We have conversations that feel real. We're learning how to be curious about each other again, instead of just coexisting. Last week, he surprised me by signing up for a woodworking class. Something he'd wanted to do for years but told himself was impractical. He came home covered in sawdust, grinning like a kid, and told me he'd made the ugliest bowl I'd ever see. It was ugly, and it was perfect. Other days are hard. We fight about things we never fought about before, because we're actually telling each other the truth now, and truth is messier than performance. We fought last month about whether to have kids. It's the first time we've really talked about it honestly. He's not sure he wants them. I'm not sure either. And admitting that feels like breaking a promise we made. When we got married, even though we never actually discussed it back then, we just assumed. Sometimes I look at him and feel the weight of all the years we spent being strangers. Sometimes he looks at me with something that might be resentment, might be grief, might just be exhaustion from trying to build something real when we're both still learning what that means. We don't know if we're going to make it. We're trying. We're showing up. But we've both accepted that choosing yourself sometimes means accepting that not everything survives the choice. And that's terrifying. And that's okay. Here's the confession I really never wanted to share. Part of me is angry at younger me. The 22-year-old who listened to her mom's fear instead of her own voice. The 26-year-old who said yes to a proposal that felt safe instead of waiting for one that felt right. The 28-year-old who took the job with the better benefits instead of the one that made her heart race. I'm angry because she gave away so much. Because she was so desperate for security that she traded her actual self for the promise of stability. And now I'm the one who has to live with that choice. I'm the one who has to rebuild from the rubble. But here's what I'm learning. Slowly, painfully, in a way that feels like growing new skin, she was doing the best she could. That younger version of me, she was terrified. She'd watched her mom struggle and sacrifice and barely survive, and she thought she was being smart. She thought she was protecting herself. She didn't know that the safest cage is still a cage. I called my mom a few weeks ago and told her everything. Not over text, not in some careful, edited email, but on the phone, my voice shaking. I told her I'd left my job. I told her David and I were in therapy. I told her I'd spent the last decade building a life I thought she wanted for me, and it had nearly destroyed me. She was quiet for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then she said, I never wanted you to be me. I wanted you to be safe. But maybe I didn't realize that safety isn't the same as being alive. She told me about dreams she'd had when she was young, about wanting to be a teacher, about a man she'd loved before my dad, someone who made her laugh but didn't have any money, and how she'd chosen my father instead because he had a stable job. How that worked out. She said, I gave you the best advice I had, but maybe it was the wrong advice. Maybe I taught you to be so afraid of struggling that you forgot to ask what you were working toward. We both cried, and something shifted between us. Some old story about who she was and who I was supposed to be. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Maybe the cruelest thing about this kind of slow betrayal is that we do it with the best intentions. We don't wake up one day and decide to abandon ourselves. We do it gradually. We do it with good reasons. We do it because we're trying to be responsible or practical, or because we're trying to make someone else happy, or because we're scared of what might happen if we're honest about what we really want. We tell ourselves it's temporary. We tell ourselves we'll get back to our real life later, after we've achieved this goal, or paid off that debt, or gotten through this hard season. But later never comes. Later is a lie we tell ourselves to make today's compromise feel bearable. And then one day you're 32, standing in your beautiful kitchen, reading a text message that wasn't meant for you, and you realize you've been sleepwalking through your own life. My mom called me last week. We've been talking more since that conversation, really talking, not just exchanging updates. She said, you sound lighter. And I am. Even with all the uncertainty. Even with the smaller paycheck and the shaky marriage. And the knowledge that I might have to start over in more ways than one. I'm lighter. Because I'm not carrying the weight of a performance anymore. I'm not waking up every day and putting on a costume of someone I think I should be. I'm just here. Messy. Uncertain. Real. There's this moment I think about sometimes. It was about a month after that conversation with David, after everything started shifting. I was walking to my car after work, and I caught my reflection in a store window. Just a glimpse. And for the first time in years, I recognized the person looking back at me. Not completely. Not perfectly, but enough to make me stop. Enough to make me feel something that might have been hope. That's what I want you to hear in this. That's the truth that's uncomfortable but necessary. You can spend your whole life building something impressive and still end up feeling empty. You can check every box on the list of what you're supposed to do and still wake up one day and realize you've been holding your breath for 10 years. And the twist, the bittersweet revelation that keeps me up at night, is this. Everything I built, every choice I made out of fear instead of truth, it wasn't wrong exactly. It was just incomplete. Those years weren't wasted. They taught me something crucial. They taught me what happens when you betray yourself slowly, quietly, with good intentions. And now I know. Now I can recognize the feeling of compromise before it becomes a prison. The scar tissue from this lesson will always be there. I'll always carry the knowledge that I'm capable of disappearing on myself. That I can be so focused on doing the right thing that I forget to ask if it's right for me. That's the shadow that follows me now. The lingering after feeling, but maybe that's okay. Maybe that awareness is the price of waking up. Maybe you have to. Know what it feels like to lose yourself before you can really commit to staying found. I'm not going to tell you to quit your job, or leave your relationship, or blow up your life. That's not what this is about. This is about the smaller, harder thing. It's about asking yourself, honestly, whether you're living your life or performing it. Whether the choices you're making are yours, or just the ones you think you're supposed to make. It's about checking in with yourself before the gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be becomes so wide that you can't find your way back. Because here's what I know now. The safest choice isn't always the right one. Security isn't the same thing as happiness. And the life you build to protect yourself from pain can sometimes be the thing that hurts you most. I think about that text message sometimes, the one that started all of this. You only get one life. Don't spend it being someone you're not. It was meant for David, but it saved me. It cracked me open. It made me look at the truth I'd been avoiding. And the truth is this. I'd been spending my one life being someone I thought I should be. Someone practical. Someone grateful. Someone who had it all together. But I wasn't spending it being me. Now I am. Imperfectly. Messily. With more questions than answers, and more fear than I'd like to admit. But I'm here. The real me. The one who writes and reads and sometimes makes choices that don't make sense on paper but feel right in her bones. That's the part of my story I swore I'd never tell anyone. Not because it's shameful, but because it's vulnerable in a way that feels dangerous. Because admitting you built the wrong life, even with the best intentions, even with good reasons, feels like confessing to a fundamental failure. But maybe it's not a failure. Maybe it's just being human. Maybe we all do this in different ways, build lives that look right from the outside while feeling empty on the inside. Maybe the bravest thing we can do is admit it and start over. I don't know how this ends yet. I don't know if David and I will make it. I don't know if my career change will feel like freedom or regret 5 years from now. I don't know if I'll wake up one day and wish I'd stayed in my beautiful prison. What I do know is this. I'm awake now. I'm here now. And for the first time in a decade, when someone asks me how I am, I might actually tell them the truth. That has to count for something. That has to be worth the risk. So wherever you are right now, whatever version of a story you're living, I want you to know. It's not too late. It's never too late to stop performing and start being. To choose truth over safety. To build a life that's actually yours. That it won't be easy. It might cost you things you thought you needed. But I promise you, the weight you lose when you stop pretending is lighter than any burden you'll carry if you don't. You only get one life. Don't spend it being someone you're not. So tell me, where are you watching this from? And if this story stirred something in you, if it made you think about your own life in a different way, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. What's the lesson you're taking from this? What's the truth you've been avoiding? You don't have to share everything, but sometimes just naming it, just putting it into words, that's the first step toward finding your way back to yourself. And if this story meant something to you, if it made you feel a little less alone in whatever you're going through, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. Because these are the stories we need more of. The real ones. The ones that hurt a little but heal a lot. The ones that remind us we're all just trying to figure this out, one messy, honest day at a time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And thank you for having the courage to sit with something uncomfortable, something true. That matters more than you know.